So, welcome back. I'll ask everybody to take their seats, if you would, please. And before we get started, I would like to remind you about that sponsors board outside and the fact that you are all please requested to sign it. So if you haven't done that already, please do so, and I will keep reminding you during the course of the day. So if you want me to stop nagging, the best thing to do would be to sign it sooner rather than later. Thanks a lot. Well, as we've heard several times over the course of the past 2 days, the application process for the new top-level domains is not for the faint of heart. There's a fairly significant registration fee, and there's a very significant registration form that will need to be completed. I've heard differing reports about the epic length of this form, but certainly it will require some focus and some concentration. But the great thing is we've got two fantastic Sherpas to guide you through what that process will be like. And if you'd like to hear from them, please do now stay in this room in Channel A. Otherwise, if you think you know how to do all this without any guidance, then feel free to go over to Channel B, where you can hear about how to successfully build a community around your top-level domain. That discussion will be moderated by Rajesh Charya. He is with ISPAI, and there will also be a panel discussion there with Lance Wolak of .org. So if you'd like to go over to Channel B, please do so now. And if you're going to stay here to get this great guidance, then let me just tell you who is going to be our Sherpa. We're going to start out with Kurt Pritz, familiar to all of you, of course, from yesterday, if not from before. He is, of course, at ICANN. He's been there for the past 7 years and has had pretty much every function in the organization, one might say. His current position is aimed at ensuring growth of ICANN's multi-stakeholder bottom-level up development model. He also leads ICANN's implementation of the new GTLD program. Before joining ICANN, he was using his creativity and imagination with nearly a decade at Walt Disney Imagineering as Vice President of Engineering and Production. And he's going to be joined up on the stage by Olaf Nordling, who is Director of Service Relations for ICANN and also manager of its Brussels office. Previously, he was the president of Telia Sonera EU Affairs Office, and he's also been a counselor at the Swedish Embassy in Paris. So to the degree that diplomacy will be required for this complicated application process, he'll be able to smooth the path there. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. We're looking forward to hearing from you the details of the application process for those who are getting ready to apply. Thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you very much for that terrific introduction, and thank you all. While I'm going to attempt to be your Sherpa, I'm going to guide you through information that's really already publicly available. So Olaf and I will help point out where that is and where the details are. But those who cannot be with us should not feel badly, because all the information we're going to discuss is available on ICANN's website. The guidebook does have some length, but you should not feel daunted. The application process and the evaluation process is meant to be a roadmap to getting a registry, not be a roadblock. If you think about the application itself and the 50 questions you're going to answer, the answers to those are really a set of promises. I mean, the rubber does hit the road in certain places early on. Applicants are expected to get a continuing operations instrument, which can take the form of a letter of credit that will ensure ongoing operations in case of failure. So that's one hard requirement. Another hard requirement before delegation is there's pre-delegation testing. So before you actually get your TLD, you have to demonstrate some competence in the operation of hardware. But at the time that you apply, really you're making a bunch of promises that is in your application. Many won't have staff yet, many won't have hardware yet. So what's realizing this and going into, all of us going into this with our eyes open, what's the purpose here? Well, the purpose really is at the end of the day, when an applicant is done filling out an application, that entity should have a clear idea of what it takes to run a registry, what's involved in spinning that thing up and operating it. So it's not me. The application process itself is really meant to be a guide for would-be applicants to TLDs. They're supposed to inform applicants as to what it takes. So at the end, the applicants are more informed than when they start. And then one more area of potential daunting. The applicant guidebook is this big fat thing that's 300 pages and 80,000 plus words. But the good news is look at Module 2, because that's where the application is and the questions are. So if anybody brought their applicant guidebook, I'd be pleased to show everyone. But out of this thick, I would hold up a very thin portion, and that's the area where every applicant needs to pay close attention. And much of the other part of the applicant guidebook is either overview or a discussion of how edge cases are handled, and we're going to talk a lot about that. So there's an application process where applicants submit an application, an evaluation. Applicants are submitted, applications are evaluated, and then we're going to provide some more links. So if that's this, I'll just leave it far away from me. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to start. The multilingual Olaf will take over for a while and talk really about a lot of substance. I'm going to talk about administration, and then Olaf will hand it back to me, and then we'll answer questions. So who can apply? Any established corporation, organization, or institution in good standing. So that means an entity. The evaluation fee we discussed yesterday is $185,000, and the rules are in the applicant guidebook. So that's the document to which you must go to understand this. So who's not eligible to apply? Individuals are not to apply, just legal entities in good standing. So yet to be formed entities cannot apply. So one piece of work you must do before embarking on the process is form your legal entity. What types of TLDs are there? What categories are there? Well, there's special rules or added requirements around 3 types of TLDs, and I'll talk about each of them in a tiny bit of depth. But there's community-based TLDs, there's geographic names, and there's internationalized domain names, something we've already discussed. Everything else is what we call a standard TLD. So notice in there's no .brand as a special type of TLD. .brand TLDs have worked their way into our lexicon as a very important part of this process, but brand TLDs will follow the rules and can operate as brand TLDs under the existing rules. So what's a community-based TLD? It's one that's established for the benefit of a community. So the only time this label comes into play in your application is in cases of string contention. What's that? That's when 2 entities apply for the same string, or the strings are so close that user confusion is likely to result. And we talked about that threshold a little bit yesterday. So the only other time that this label comes into play is when you execute an agreement. So as a community TLD, you're going to restrict yourself in some way to address the needs of your community. And those restrictions, they could be registration restrictions. Who could register names in this TLD, for example, would be written right into your registry agreement. And there's a set of criteria about which you must conform in order to be classified as a community TLD. And I think Olaf's going to talk a little bit more about that later. But as I said, the only time that criteria comes into play is in cases of a string contention. Otherwise, a community TLD is just a self-identified TLD that addresses the needs of a community that is restricting itself in a certain way. Geographic names were created because government interests are involved in certain names. And so what are geographic names? Well, for the purpose of the guidebook, we tried to be as clear as possible. So they're usually defined by ISO lists, for example, country names in the ISO 3166-1 list, or subregions in the ISO 3166-2 list. Read the guidebook. In certain cases, it's those names and translations of names, in the case of country names, or just translations you see in that list. So what's the deal with geographical names? Well, first, country names will not be delegated in the first round. And country names are defined in the guidebook using those lists. And there's a few bullets there, so you can see the full definition of those. But there are other types of geographical names too, right? So regional names, such as continent names, or sub-region names. You know, for me, it's easy to refer to states in the United States or the states of Germany. Those sub-region names are in that 3166-2 list. So, and then capital city names is another category of geographic names. Are you raising your hand, Anthony? I think you can ask a question without a microphone, so I'll finish talking about geographic names and then we'll get to you. So, and capital city names. So those names, besides satisfying the requirements in the guidebook, also need the approval of the relevant government that's involved. City names, depending on how the applicant defines its role, may or may not need the approval of the government. So that's geographic names. Anthony?
Yes, it's a question I've heard a number of times and I don't have a clear answer, and perhaps you could answer it. Is there any particular reason that a government would, say a city, would file as a community? What is the cross-section between those two concepts, if any?
So I think they're independent. Your geographical name, if you're one of these things, you know, if you're on that list, and if you're identified as a geographical name, you have to get the approval of the relevant government. Then there's another consideration. The applicant registry could decide to make itself a community name. So it's not a requirement that it defines itself as a community name. And you know, perhaps the government might condition its approval on it being a community TLD.
Can you see any advantage to a city becoming a community, given that it already is in real-world terms a community, and it is typically an elected representative of its people, and wouldn't it be just hampering itself in some way to identify criteria today that it couldn't change later?
Yeah, I think it could. I think when I talk about community, I talk about community in the very narrow definition of the guidebook, and that is you satisfy those criteria. But yeah. Thank you. Yep. So go ahead and ask questions. Another category or type of TLD that has a few special rules around it are internationalized domain names. These are names in the lower half of the slide that are actually delegated as part of the IDN fast track process. And a lot's been talked about it here, about the benefit that we think IDNs will bring to this domain space. There are some special rules around IDNs that are in the applicant guidebook, and they really have to do with complying with technical requirements that are laid out in the IDNA protocol and the IDN guidelines and certain RFCs that are promulgated by the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF. So the requirements around IDNs are really technical in nature to make sure that IDN is IDNA compliant. So we looked at this slide yesterday, and the key dates in the when might one apply are I'm never doing this animation stuff again. I don't do it, somebody else does. Well, I'm just going to tell you. So the application date opens on January 12th and closes on April 12th. And there's a special date on March 29th where you have to apply for a slot. So I might be in this slide for a long time. Oh, do I go over like that? Oh, there's one. There's another. Woohoo! Okay, so evidently I have a metal plate in me that blocks the signal. So those are the three key dates, and we'll gratefully leave this slide behind us, maybe. So where do we apply? So the application will be web-based, of course. We call it the TLD application system, or TAS, and you can find it online. And these tips are kind of sophomoric, so we'll just skip them, except to say remember the March 29th date again. So the application process itself. So the application must be submitted by the deadline. The fee has to be paid, and the form has to be complete. So all that has to be done by that time. And the steps in the application process are to enter into TAS and sign up. So that's a fairly straightforward process, and request an application slot. So I think at this stage of the game, you're asked to put a deposit down of $5,000, and that guarantees you an application slot. And then you can start filling in the blanks and completing the application, providing the application fee, and supporting documentation such as proof of good standing if you're a corporation, or government approval if you're a geographical name will be submitted at that time. The reason for this kind of odd application methodology is that there's certain vetting of each applicant that has to take place at ICANN before we're allowed to proceed with actually taking the money and running off and handing off the application to evaluators. So once all that's done, then the application can start, and the evaluation phase begins. Ken, did you have a question?
No, I think you answered it with regard to the fee to get the slot.
Yeah.
$5,000.
Yeah, Anthony?
Yes, I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the TAS. First of all, when can we see it? Second, I've read that it's text-based, and yet the application calls for many diagrams and other supporting materials, and obviously as people prepare their applications, they're probably not going to be using a text editor. It's a fairly, using Word or something of that nature. How should people think about taking what they've prepared and putting it into this application? How do you, for instance, attach diagrams and make it refer to the right spot? What about headings, that sort of thing? And we haven't seen this, so any color you could give to what it looks like and how we should think about preparation would be helpful.
It is, thanks Anthony, it's planned to show screens and demonstrate part of the application system in ICANN's Dakar meeting. And because of the location of that meeting, there'll be significant efforts put towards remote participation. There's text boxes. There's also capability to upload documents. So I don't know the exact answer to your question. I know where you're going for it. But for example, I know if you have the approval of a relevant government or a form in good standing, you have to be able to upload that. I can't describe to you the exact rules about the graphics you want to upload that are part of your application. So I'll get some more information published about that, and we'll note it as a question. So the evaluation process itself really tracks the applicant guidebook. And we expect most applications to track through on a straight line through what we call initial evaluation and then be delegated. But there are side tracks that applications, side roads that applications can go down. And like I said, it's mapped to the guidebook. So Module 1 of the guidebook really gives you details in how to apply and gives an overview of the entire process. But the gist of the whole application is in Module 2. There's 50 application questions that test the financial and operational wherewithal of applicants and other things that Olaf's going to talk about in a minute. We expect most applications will go through initial evaluation and not any other types of evaluation. In our planning, when we're figuring out how much all this is going to cost and how many TLDs are going to delegate, we plan for most of the applications to pass. It's intended to be a roadmap and not a roadblock. And so Module 2 is where all the application questions are. Olaf will talk more about this, so I'm going to mention it really briefly. Extended evaluation is where you go if you don't pass initial evaluation. You get another bite at the apple. There's 4 grounds. We described them yesterday for objecting to a TLD application. If you file a controversial type of application, you may go to objection land, which is an independent dispute resolution path. And that's a typo down there. How the heck did that get there? So somebody's going to be sacked. So that Module 4 is really about, it's me, isn't it? Yeah. Module 4 is really about contention resolution. If there's identical strings applied for, that's that. So if you're following along at home, get whiteout out and fix that up. And then transition to delegation is really about signing a contract with ICANN and getting delegated into the root zone. So with that, I'm going to just bring up the timeline. Remember yesterday this took a long time to come up. And this is the application window closes on April 12th. We're going to go through some timelines now. Olaf's going to take you through some timelines that tell you why it takes from April of 2012 to November 2012 for applications, evaluated applications to start plopping out the other end and eventually be delegated, maybe at the end of 2012, maybe the beginning of 2013. So where were you going to take over? Not yet, right? Nope, after this. So I'm going to start with the very simplest evaluation path, and this is the one we think most applicants are going to go down. So we receive the applications, and there's 2 months in there for an administrative check. Does it really take 2 months? Well, no. We plan for it to take about a month, but we're giving our government advisory committee, if you read your guidebook, they have an opportunity to give early warning advice to applicants, and Olaf's going to describe that. So we give the governments a couple months to consider that. But in the meantime, the first check is to ensure all questions are answered and supporting documents are in proper form and the application is received. And then the most important part occurs, and that's coming up. And that's the initial evaluation. And what I'm going to do is not talk about these things in initial evaluation because I think it's the most important part. After this, I want to get some lessons on why this particular form of thing is so slow, so I don't burden listeners with it again. So these are the types of initial evaluation tests that each application goes through, and Olaf's going to describe that. I got you, Anthony. And then finally, there's transition to delegation. So you can see this path takes 7 months, and then 2 to 5 months on transition to delegation. And the only thing I want to say here is the administrative check for each application will be closed after 2 months, so that'll be done. The initial evaluations will be closed after 5 months. So after 5 months, ICANN will post the results of all initial evaluations at the same time. And then the TLD applications are kind of on their own. So they'll march down this path to coming to an agreement with ICANN and getting delegated, going through the pre-delegation testing and going through IANA to get delegated at their own pace. So everything will happen pretty much in lockstep until that last stage, and then you'll see delegations occur individually, not all at one time, although I expect there to be